And here's why. And it's really unfortunate that the FDA has this narrative out there about drug shortages, and they've been talking about them for 20 years. The industry talks about them. Everybody wrings their hands. We have shortages of nothing in the United States but critical drugs. So there's something else going on here. So here's one of the reasons we have shortages. It's not the full reason. So here's how and the story of how we lost our ability to make penicillin illustrates this.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And this happened a couple of years after we opened up free trade with China, which is a whole other issue. So in 2004, the last penicillin plant in Syracuse, New York said we're closing. And this was like a facility with 60 buildings. They used to make 70% of the world supply of penicillin. And so why is that? And New York Times wrote an article about it closing, but nobody went back and did the deep in the rabbit hole to find out what was going on. So what I learned while researching China RX, which took 3 years because it's so complex, was that China and its companies were dumping the raw material on the global market at below market prices. And I had the data point from the industry. So a good person sent this to me. There are slides. And it kept that price low for 4 years. And during those 4 years, people can't compete. Companies in the U.S., in India, and elsewhere, they can't compete. They're driven out of business. And so then you raise the price. So what happens? You have fewer suppliers because of this cartel-type behavior. And all those suppliers are concentrated in a single country. Or most of them, not all, but most of them. So, of course, we're going to have fragile supply chains when you have a handful of suppliers. The same with oncology. Some of the generic oncology products, Donorubicin, the core chemicals to make them are made in China. And when the FDA went in to say, hey, you guys got a serious problem in this plant and banned 29 of the medicines, the ingredients coming from there, because they had huge issues. But the FDA had to exempt 15 of those drugs from its own ban because of a concern about shortages, which I was reading about in the newspaper. There were prominent hospitals rationing it, but nobody came out and told the truth that, well, the reason is because it's concentrated in a single country and their product is, the FDA is having problems with it. And now where we are, Dave, which to me is really concerning, is that because of coronavirus, the FDA withdrew all of its inspectors from other countries. And so nobody's inspecting this stuff.
No. Here we go again.
And nobody's testing it.
Right, here we go again. More jet fuel or the compound-related jet fuel and products again. Here we go.
Yeah. Let me tell the jet fuel.
Yeah, tell that story. Tell that, because most people are unaware.
You should put this up on your website along with this, or maybe include it as part of this video. It's so compelling. So I had the privilege of testifying last summer to the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. This is a bipartisan group appointed by Democrats and Republicans in Congress. And they asked me to testify on this. And they brought someone from the Department of Defense who gave very credible testimony. So during the hearing, Dave, it's remarkable. There's a retired Army colonel who is a member of the commission, and he started talking about his blood pressure medicine. And he said, I had three medicines, and the ingredients were made in China, and they had rocket fuel chemicals in them. And he said, if I'm getting them, then our active duty military people must be getting it also. So I have this 90-second clip. It's so powerful. And it's remarkable to me that their special interests still want to keep the supply chain the way it is and make us dependent on a country that, you've heard about the threat that China made against Americans, saying, this was about a month ago.
Right.
That they threatened to withhold critical medicines from Americans. And they said if we do that, then Americans will die in the ocean of coronavirus. So they've threatened us. So we have special interests that want to keep us, all of us Americans, dependent on a country that's threatened to kill us by withholding these products. I'm not making any of this up.
No, I know you're not.
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Unfortunately, that's the case.
And I would encourage your listeners and viewers to follow me on Twitter at Rosemary100. with updates of what's going on and actions people can take, because we have to know this. What I'm happy to say is a lot of people, and there's bills in Congress on both sides, some are better than others. So I hope we can actually turn that talk into action.
And action seems to follow, Rosemary, what I have found over the years. When the public becomes aware of something and starts to voice out in a very loud fashion about we're wise to this, we're not going to tolerate this anymore, this needs to be fixed. Because then all of a sudden, all those special interests that have been influencing this particular issue in a certain direction, which hasn't helped the American public or actually the world public, all of a sudden that can change on a dime. Now let's talk about what every one of our listeners can, but not just can, must do to if you will, put pressure on the very people who have allowed this to occur over the ensuing several decades.
Well, here's one thing that your listeners and viewers can do tomorrow. Do it today. Go online to whitehouse.gov/contact and say that you want the president to sign the Buy American Executive Order, which would begin to support manufacturing of critical drugs for our military, the VA, and national stockpile here in the United States. It's just a start. They're not going to make everything. They're not going to take over the world. Just getting it started. And some of these medicines, Dave, are critical drugs in shortage right now.
Right.
That is what you can do. Go to whitehouse.gov/contact and just put in your name and say, I want the president to sign the Buy American Executive Order for medicine manufacturing here at home. That would be a great first step, because there are a lot of good people that want to see this happen. And this draft executive order, it already exists. So much work has been done on it, I hear. But now we just have to cross the finish line. And that will help give companies that want to, I've been contacted by companies that want to make our critical medicines here in the United States, but they need the contracts. So that is an action step.
So, Rosemary, what's been the holdup so far? I mean, to me, that sounds like something Donald J. Trump would just say, hey, right now, give me that. I hear that exist. Hand it over. Let me sign that thing. What are the roadblocks? Because to me, it seems like a no-brainer, especially after all we've been through, and the fact that, let's face it, this virus came out of China. Okay, it came out of China, and let's face it, they were procuring PPE and holding it for themselves and trying to hold it back for the world. And then, as you mentioned, some of this other PPE that came out of China for the rest of the world afterwards was beyond faulty. And it was faulty here. And
right. Remember, we got 1 million testing kits for coronavirus that were junk.
Yeah.
Think of that. So you might get a false positive or false negative. Think of that.
And I know in my family's home country of the Czech Republic, Prague got tens of thousands of test kits from China that were faulty.
Interesting. I was interviewed by a Czech reporter a couple weeks ago.
Did he talk about that?
I read about it. We talked about the medicine issue, and they did a big story on it. I'll have to send it to you if you still speak the language of your
a bit, yeah, actually,
family.
Yeah.
But you would think this would make sense. Again, if there's nothing else that we've learned when you have a global pandemic, you can't depend even on your allies.
No.
The United Kingdom banned the export of critical drugs. Italy, no doubt, did, because they need it for their population and their hub of medicine making and ingredient making. India did, China did. So we have to be self-sufficient. It's not, there's no agenda here. It's just common sense.
It's absolute common sense, and it's what's safe. It's a safety factor. So, Rosemary, has it been the industry that have been putting pressure on the White House not to have this executive order signed, or where's obviously the pressure's going to come from China, but what about, is it industry? Where's the pressure coming from?
Well, I think industry and China in some cases are the same.
Yeah, good point.
So I just call them special interests that.
Yeah.
But now that the public is aware of it and the facts are out there, incontrovertible, just despite people, ankle biters out there trying to, say, well, this isn't true. It's just to no avail because the facts are the facts. And if we don't, and this issue is so important, Dave, it's medicine. It's not like, Huawei. It's not like steel or aluminum. This is personal.
Right.
And it's a kitchen table issue that all of us can understand, that we need to have high quality medicines, some of them made here in the U.S., not all of them, and have the capacity to make it when we need them in the next pandemic. Because, as you know, there'll be another pandemic.
Well, I believe this was the beta test. I've been chastised for that. I believe this was the beta test for something coming down the line, whether it's a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But this was the beta test to see how far they could push the totalitarian state, if you will. Like, for example, in the state of Michigan, where I'm at, what's happening here with our governor. See how far they could push the envelope before people pushed back.
Interesting. Well, it's going to hit just by the virtue of history and population growth and how disease is transmitted. And so either we fix it now.
That's right.
Or down the road, we will be even worse situation because China is ramping up production even of the finished drugs. And I think they're going to knock out India as the generic drug maker of the world eventually, because they subsidize their companies and they know how to undercut and drive out their global competitors.
Rosemary, is there a particular person in the administration that you absolutely trust in this issue who if Rosemary has the ball right now and you have to hand it to somebody to help get that ball across the goal line, is there somebody in the administration you would hand that ball to that you believe, that you know based on your interactions is someone that can be trusted to get that ball across the goal line on this issue?
There are good people, Dave, that do see this as critical to our national security and the well-being of our country. And they just need help.
Yeah.
They need to have the support of the American people. And that's why it's so important for your listeners and viewers to go to whitehouse.gov/contact and say the White House needs to sign the Buy American Executive Order so we can make our medicines here. That would be a big step forward.
It would be a huge step.
It really would.
Because, Rosemary, when we've asked our viewers and our listeners on our platform to step up and do that, on 3 occasions I'm aware of, we have shut down the switchboard at the White House. And
well, now they're not taking calls, so people have to write a comment.
That's right. So
that's my understanding.
Right. With the pandemic issue, they're not taking the calls, so we can't given the phone numbers is. So whitehouse.gov/contact, and what you want to put is that President Trump must sign as soon as possible the Buy American Executive Order
for our medicines. And this is just to get things started.
That's right.
And what's
the next phase? What's the next phase then, Rose?
Well, let me just say there are fearmongers out there who say, well, this will disrupt global supplies. I mean, it's crazy. They're already disrupted in ways that we didn't anticipate. I just want to say this is a way to start. And this is just for our protection.
Right.
And we may never bring the whole industry back. We don't need to.
No.
But we have to have enough capability to make those things that we need that are urgent. Now, as a physician, you could, I'm sure, identify the 5,100 drugs that you have to have for the functioning of your healthcare system in good times and times like this. And to know where we are vulnerable. One thing I'm happy to say as a result of China RX, the first recommendation, another big finding was that it was no one's job in the federal government to know who controls our medicine supply. And so the first recommendation is we need to know who controls our medicine supply. And I'm happy to say now that recommendation has gone out in the public sector and private sector now, and people are looking because they have to. But we just can't lose this moment and then go on to something else, 6 months from now. Mm-hmm. We need an ongoing capability to identify our vulnerabilities and then to identify those places where we're most vulnerable and make those critical drugs here and all the ingredients to make them so we're not dependent on China.
Rosemary, again, how can folks follow you? And we need a website where folks can get the book and how they can follow you on social media.
China RX is the name of the book, and Amazon. There were new books that were produced. They should be available on Amazon. There's been a time frame with production and shipping and so forth. The publisher has it, National Book Network. And I want your listeners to know we donate proceeds to good causes to help paralyzed veterans and others. So buy China RX, tell it to your member of Congress and others. Follow me on Twitter, Rosemary100. I haven't had the time to keep up with a website. So just have people search China RX in my name, and you can see videos and other things that give it more background and more content on this subject matter. We all need to know this because this is our life. This is about our survivability.
It is, and it's about it's about our individual survivability and the survivability of every member of our family and the survivability of our country.
It is.
It's that simple. And I thank you, Rosemary. You take a tremendous amount of blowback from...
Oh, I don't feel that at all. I just don't even pay it attention.
Well, and good for you, because I try to do the same, although some days are more difficult than others. That Czech background in me kind of comes out sometimes. But the bottom line, Rosemary, is that the gift you have given every person of our country and the world is really their life and their freedom.
Oh, well.
And I think, and very few people, Rosemary, would have the courage to not only initiate what you did, but follow through on what you've done and continue to do. And I thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. You are a national treasure, and in so doing, you have given life, liberty, and freedom to every American and, frankly, every person of the world. And I thank you for that.
Well, I can only say thank you for those kind words. I think we're just called as citizens of a country, as fellow travelers on this life, that we have to help each other.
Yeah, we do.
And we have to help each other in different ways. And, I remind people that these are medicines taken by members of Congress, both sides, occupants of the White House.
Yeah. Left
and right, and everything in between. And when you're in that sickbed, when you have an infection that need that medicine. Your kid needs it. Your spouse needs it. Your children. We can't let this happen.
We can't.
So it's an honor to do this work, Dave. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to visit with your listeners and viewers today to get the word out. And thank you for helping to make a difference. And all of you who are listening, we can do this. I'm just one person. Mm-hmm. And you are a single person also, but together we can make a difference. Go to whitehouse.gov/contact and say, we need that Buy American executive order signed to bring some of our medicine making back home.
I thank you, Rosemary, again, for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. Folks, I'd like to thank you for your time today. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail.